Hey guys, and welcome to this video. If you see this, this means that you've gone through the boring stuff and are ready to make your first application. So good job! I will not keep you waiting, let's just start directly. So for this application, I want to make a simple counter. I want to have two buttons, one that increases the counter by 1 and one that decreases the counter by 1. The first thing we want to do in our Android Studio project is make the layout that we are going to use. So let's go to our layout folder and look at what we have. So by default, Android Studio gives us an activity with only a text view in the middle. We have 3 windows we can use to alter our layouts, and they are defined here in the top right. So right now we are in our design window, and this is a nice window to start with because it allows you to drag and drop certain components from this palette towards the app and define attributes here to the right. However, if you want to be a bit more quick and you know what you are looking for, you might go to a split view where you have the window on the right and your code on the left, or you might go to a full code. I normally use a split, but do whatever you feel like. So let's start with the layout that we actually want. The first thing we want to do is we want to have a text view that displays the current value of the counter. So let's reuse the text view that's already been made. And the first thing we want to do here is give it an ID so that we can reference it in our Java class. So I'll just say Android:ID, add an ID, and let's call it text view counter. Nice thing to know is in Android Studio you can hit tab to autocomplete certain names or certain commands, and you can hit Alt Enter when, for example, something is yellow. Let's see if we get that in the future. For this text view, the ID has now been defined. The width and the height of the text view have been defined as wrap content, which means the box will scale to the content that is provided. The default text is Hello World right now. I want to change that to 0. And as you can see, now Android Studio gives me a warning. So let's use our shortcut, Alt Enter, and then Android Studio will show us possible solutions. In this case, we just have to extract the string resource. The constraints have already been defined as well, so we don't have to do anything with that. One thing that I do want to change is the text size of the 0, because as you can see, it is now very small. So let's say text size, and let's just use 40 SP, for example. That's a bit better. We could go even bigger. Let's go 80 SP. Now let's add our buttons. So I'm gonna have a button, and I'm gonna do the same for the width and the height. So I'm just gonna wrap the content of the button. Let's also give it an ID, and I want this to be the plus button. So button plus. Let's give it a text as well so that we know that it is the plus button. I want to have it in capital letters. We extract it to a string resource. And then I just want to define where it is located. So let's start with our constraint. And I want the left of the button to be to the left of the parent. So start to start off. And I want the top of this button to be aligned to the bottom of our text view. So as you can see now, it changes position and it is below the 0 and aligned to the left side of the view. For now, that is our first button. I'm gonna copy paste this to make a second one, and that we are gonna call button minus. The string we need to change as well then. So let's call it minus, extract it to a string resource. And instead of to the left side, I want to align this one to the right side, which is the end. So end to end of parent. As you can see, it's now to the right. So with these margins, it's not really pretty. So what I want to do is select both of them, and then I can say right click, chains, and I can add a horizontal chain in between them, which will make sure that they are like distributed equally along the horizontal axis. A last thing that I want is make them a little bit bigger as well, since we have the space. So we can go text size. Let's make the text size maybe not that big, 30 SP. Also, I would like both of them to be a little bit lower. So we are gonna add a margin to the top of about 16 dps. And this is a layout that for now I am quite content with. So let's start with our actual actions. For this, we have to go to our Java file. And here it's important to note that this onCreate function is what's being called when we open our application. So let's start with our first thing. We want to have a counter value. And to have that, we will initialize an integer counter value. Then secondly, I also want to be able to use the text or the button views that we just made. So we'll make two buttons here. We'll say button plus and button minus. This is just to define the variables. Right now these variables are not actually connected to the views of the buttons that we made in the layout. So that's our next thing that we want to do. So button plus, and then we say find view by ID. And there we use the ID that we just used, which is button plus. What I now want to do is make sure that when we click the button, something actually happens. So we can say button plus set on click listener. And then we have to define some sort of function that we'll use as a listener. In this case, I want to write my own function within this class. So I'll use the context of this class, and I'm gonna call it on plus listener. And here we see that Android Studio gives us an error because that method doesn't exist yet. So if we alt enter this, the option will be to create a new method, and that's perfect. One thing that I forgot to do is initialize this counter value to 0. So now we have our button plus defined. Let's do the same for our button minus. So there we have our two functions. Now we just have to define what happens in these functions. So the first thing that needs to happen is that we actually increase the counter value. So counter value plus is 1. This is in case of the plus listener. And minus 1 in case of the minus listener. And then secondly, what needs to be done is that we update the text view. So let's also reference the text view. We'll call it counter view. And right now this one hasn't been hooked either, and that we have to do in our onCreate. Otherwise it doesn't exist yet when we go into these minus listeners. So counter view is find view by ID, counter text view. So now we are allowed to edit it here. So what we can do is say counter view dot set text, and there we have to pass a string. So here we say string dot value of, and then it will transform our integer counter value to a string. If we don't use the string dot value of, our application will crash, which is something we do not want. So this should be all the actions that we need. Let's see what happens if we run this on one of our emulators. Okay, so our emulator has started up, and as you can see, the application has been loaded. When we hit the plus button, the counter value is increased. When we hit the minus button, the counter value is decreased. Of course, this application is rather easy, but in the upcoming videos, we'll go deeper into what we can do with Android Studio. For now, I would say start playing around with this program, start creating some of your own applications, and just try and see what's possible. If you like this video, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe if you want to see more. See you in the next video.